And then Jesus calling Lazarus out of the tomb. And now I can't get it. There we go. And the man who had died came out, his hands and feet bound with linen strips and his face wrapped with a cloth. And Jesus said to them, unbind him and let him go. Many Jews, therefore, who had come with Mary had seen what Jesus did, believed in him. So the last section we're left with, unbind him and let him go. The end of Jesus' recorded words. No lesson, no conversation. Just John's next sentence. Many believed, many saw and believed in him. This is the greatest miracle that Jesus has done to date. And there's no follow-up. Why was that? Why is that, I ask myself.
There's no what? It's a follow-up, no additional teaching.
Yeah, no elaboration. Lazarus didn't say thank you. Mary and Martha didn't. No jumping for joy or anybody, praising God or just unbind him and let him go.
At least it wasn't recorded.
Yeah.
God will say elsewhere that many things Jesus did are not recorded. So we don't forget that.
Well, yeah, but the point of Jesus not saying anything after this is Jesus said everything that needed to be said before he raised Lazarus.
Okay.
So when he raises Lazarus, that emphasizes everything that he had said to Mary and especially Martha and what he had said before the people. That's what I'm pretty sure right up to that point of Lazarus coming forward, when you were like Martha, he stated they moved the stone. It's kind of like the women or the men at the wedding when Mary said, do whatever he tells you to do. And he told them, fill these vats with water. Well, they did it. I'm pretty sure they're expecting it to still be water, not wine. So then you have this point, they're like, yeah, you don't roll that stone away. He fixes it egg on his face. And then here you have it.
So I think Joey hit the nail on the head when he said that's all we have recorded. John doesn't elaborate on that. And why? What is the theme of John's book?
The theme is to prove that Jesus is deity.
And that's what it was. These are written so that you may believe that Jesus is the Christ. And that was the next sentence. Many saw and believed. So Jesus is like, yep, that's the point of this whole thing. I'm done. My work done. Teresa.
We have to remember the Holy Spirit is working through John, and that's why he's recording what he recorded.
Exactly.
We have what we need.
What happened afterwards with all of the celebration and everything is not what this book is about. What this book is about is how people, when you read about Jesus or you see Jesus do something, how do you react?
Well, it's words ineffable. You can't use words to describe it. Commentators have to study and begin to study the words of thought before they even put it down to help explain this moment. The Bible studies, people that study the Bible, so they can try to get a concept, okay, what's going on here? At that time, you had no words. Words doesn't justify what actually happened.
Yeah, my guess is that it was dead silent.
That's right. Jesus God has already inspired those words. And so we just got to kind of parse through it, and try to figure out, hey, what's going on here? And try to, have it out with good thought and words comments, like I said, commentators would write down.
Let me say this, at the end of verse 45, as you said, we don't get anything else. But I really can't see a lot of Jews putting their faith in Jesus and the conversation going south. It's not recorded, but I just picture a lot of enthusiasm, a lot of high fives to borrow from our culture today. You know, a lot of excitement around what happened. I see a lot more than what's recorded.
Yeah.
And I just accept it as such.
Yeah, and the reason that I believe was because of the theme of the book. What was important was that many believed.
That's right.
But then there's a sad news right after that, because that continues on with a big but. But
There were other mourners.
some of them went to the Pharisees
The other mourners.
and told, some of them, we're talking about the mourners that were there, and told them what Jesus had done. Given that conjunction, do you suppose these Jews were going to the Pharisees to tell them of a wonderful miracle that had just occurred? That this must be the promised Messiah because he just raised a man from the dead?
We don't know what they told them other than the facts of the situation. But were they positive for Jesus or were they a negative? We're not sure. We know what the reaction of the Pharisees and Sadducees was. We know that because of what's said there. But the people that went to them, I don't really, I'm at a loss to say.
Well, to me, the word but stands in opposition to the ones that saw and believed in him. Now, maybe I'm reading too much into that, but
I understand what you're saying.
stands in contrast to those. As a child, so this is the route that I went with that. As a child, do you remember tattling? Okay. As a parent, have your children ever tattled? What's the motive behind that?
Get someone else in trouble for you.
Well, it depends, they may have a real good reason. An older sister would tell on a little 4-year-old that's getting into something they don't have any business doing.
Trying to gain some credit.
That's really what, you're trying to gain favor. But here comes the other deal of it, and I think that you got probably different people with different motives in going to the Pharisees. You got some that already know that the Pharisees have already said in the council, if you confess him as the Messiah, we'll put you out of the synagogue.
Yeah. At this point, they know the attitude of the Pharisees. Yeah.
Right, so some of them may have went, notice I stress, may have went kind of like we get people today. You get into a study and they'll go, well, I'll have to talk to my preacher first.
There's that but.
Yeah, there's that but. Because I'm not going to do anything that's contrary to what somebody else told me to do. Even if I see it being true. So you have some that are probably going there, okay, what are you going to do now, Pharisees? Can we confess him now? And then, but see, you have those others that said, we don't care what the Pharisees said. We've seen this miracle, now we believe.
Yeah.
We've seen this. And it's not going to be man's influence. So you probably have some like that. Then you have some that are there just to tell the Pharisees. They're only looking for what he does anyway, just to report back to the Pharisees. To be like that tattletale, I want to gain some credit with the Pharisees.
Good possibility. All of those are good possibilities.
Both of those two groups are loving the praise of men more than God. Whether it's a tattletale or just to have the Pharisees' approval for I believe.
So the result of them is the chief priests and the Pharisees gathered the council together and said, what are we to do? For this man performs many signs. Is that a legitimate question to ask?
Really, it's not. In their mindset, because they are trying to discredit him and put him away, and they're in fear of their position, and they're in fear of what the Roman government might do to them and all that kind of stuff. That generates that. But is that a legitimate question? No, it's not really legitimate. They should realize what he has done based upon the miracles that.
I thought of it kind of the opposite of what you did, but you might be right because in the other account that this question was asked, those people were cut to the heart. And they said, what do we do? You know,
It's almost like.
that's a legitimate question when you're confronted with Jesus.
Acts chapter 2.
What do I do about that?
On Pentecost, that's the question they had.
Yeah.
They were cut to the heart.
But they were cut to the heart. And
They
he's
realized what he was.
exactly
But there were some still that day that didn't believe.
that didn't.
Well, the Bible teaches us to test the spirits, so maybe some of them were just legitimately questioning what they saw, trying to figure out if they were getting bamboozled somewhere. I can see some people being a little cautious about it. The next verse frames their position, though.
Yes, pretty much.
Yeah.
When you see a sign that says, now he said, this man performs many signs. When you see a sign on the highway informing you of a life-changing moment ahead, what goes through your mind?
Well, you responded to it. When it says bridge out,
Wow, you read my mind. I said, oh, they put those signs up everywhere. I don't need to stop for a bridge out sign. That bridge has been here forever. I don't know if any of you have been down to Burned Out Bridge or used to travel across it years ago, but if you continue on very far from that and there's no bridge out sign anymore, it's just gone and you're going to get wet. So this whole conversation with these guys just amazed me. That there's two ways when the oil light goes on your car. There's two ways to fix that. One, you can put oil in your car and keep going. The other way is to cut the wire to the light and the light goes out. You can either pay attention to the sign or you can rip the sign out and say, what they don't know won't hurt them. They won't be any of the wiser. That sent me down a rabbit hole that I've been chasing after for 30 years. And I've been telling some people that the New Testament tells us exactly how to be saved from eternal death and how to have eternal life and how we should live and worship in this life. And it's dawned on me finally that for 30 years, they haven't heard a word I've said.
I think it points to mankind too. I mean, what we're seeing here is not any different than what we see now. The Pharisees and the priests had already made up their mind. They were looking for a Messiah, but this wasn't him because he didn't come the way they thought he should have come. They had a preconceived idea of what he should have been. And Jesus didn't fit that preconceived idea. So they've already discounted him. Now he's just a nuisance. Today, people religiously have a preconceived idea of what salvation is, what the Messiah should be, and those things. And they are not interested in listening to any other logic or any other discussion because they have made up their mind, so all they will do is respond against any other ideas.
Yep. And so I tried to imagine how Jesus felt. This is only a few people that I've talked to this about over a long period of time. Imagine how Jesus felt when thousands of people had seen and heard the miracles and the lessons that he had taught, and they still didn't change. They still didn't change. So what do I do now? I'm going to go tell somebody else what Jesus can do. I'm done talking to the Pharisees.
Well, he cautions us about kicking the dust off of our feet in some situations in that disciple story. I think that's something for us to keep in mind today. You know, there are folks that we talk to and try to encourage, and after years and years, their soul is still worth more than all the world, but your time is short, and you know, don't waste your time on somebody that is not listening. And I don't mean that to like discard them all together, but don't, just move on. That's
Yeah.
what I'm trying to say, and I say that politely.
All the Pharisees wanted to do was rip out the sign and think that that solved the problem. Just tear this page out of the Bible, and Jesus never said it. That's the kind of,
It's kind of like.
I should use the word illogical logic. I'd put down stupid logic just because I thought of the passage in Psalms that says that he who thinks that there is no God is just stupid. But if we let him go on like this, everyone will believe in him, and the Romans will come and take away both our place and our nation.
There's the problem with Christianity.
There's the stupid logic. You know, is that a contradiction of terms? So I Googled logic, and bad or incorrect, this is what I found. Bad or incorrect logic occurs when premises fail to support the conclusion, or the conclusion does not follow the premises. That's a syllogism, I said. I learned that in Bible study years ago. I didn't learn that in school. I don't know why, but I didn't. But one or more premises, and then the delta, you know, the 3 little dots. And we use syllogisms all the time, pretty much unconsciously a lot of the time too. We have a couple of said premises, and then we come to a conclusion. So here's the, whoops. Okay. This is the syllogism. If we let him continue like this, everyone will believe in him. First problem with the premise. What do you think that is? They weren't letting Jesus do anything. He was doing what the Father told him to do, and he didn't need anybody's permission to do what he was doing. And then by everyone, do they mean to exclude the Romans? Or were they figured into that premise that the Romans would start believing in him?
Their issue here, plain and simple, is they were wrestling with 2 gods. And the God of power and prestige and national identity was edging out the true and living God. That's what you're looking at.
That's what's happening here. You're exactly right.
And it's a problem still today with mankind.
So here's premise number 2. The Romans will come and take away both our place and our nation. Problem with premise number 2 is the Romans had already taken away their nation 165 years ago.
But they had taken away their place in it.
What's that?
They had taken away their place in it.
Well, they hadn't taken away their place yet. Yeah, as for their place, where does power and authority come from?
In reality, from God.
What did do you remember what, does it come from Rome? Does it come from Washington, D.C.?
For some people, yes.
Yeah. And that's where they had gotten to at this point in their history. That's where they'd gotten to. Power came from Rome, or power came from Jerusalem, or power came from wherever. But remember what Jesus' answer was to Pilate when Pilate says, "Don't you realize that I have the power to release you?"
You have no authority except that God gave it to you.
So he's starting off on the wrong premise, as far as power is concerned.
As far as, that the premises is wrong. You can see from this statement that they believed that the Romans were stronger than their idea of God, their belief in God. That's why Jesus said, you don't believe in me means you don't believe in God. Jesus told a parable about a vineyard owner who went away on a long journey and led his vineyard to some men that he chose for the job of tending the vineyard. This is in Matthew 21, 33 and following verses. The vineyard was supposed to be tended by these guys, and then the owner was off on a trip, and he sent people back to reap some of the profits from the vineyard, and they killed some of those people. And so he sent the son. Surely they'll listen to my son. And so he sent his son back, and they said, "Oh, here's the heir. We'll kill the heir, and we'll inherit the vineyard." That's more of that. But these were the same people meeting in that council. The Pharisees and the scribes in the council, they're the very same ones who heard Jesus tell this parable, and they perceived at that time that he was talking about them. Then they feared the crowds. They wanted to kill him then, but they feared the crowds because the crowds were already convinced that he was a prophet. Now they fear the Romans. And their conclusion was just exactly like the parable. Kill the heir, and we get to keep the inheritance. That's illogical logic. That's stupid logic.
Here's the ironic part. They thought if they killed him, they would stop him. And he'd stop people from believing him. And killing him, he was resurrected, and everyone began to believe in him. And Rome came and took their place away from them. They kind of prophesied their own doom.
And that's what we call in politics unintended consequences. It's human nature. Big Bang Theory, evolution of species, abortion, only the strong will survive. They keep making and changing laws. But why do they do that? Not for the good of the people or the nation, but to keep themselves in power. One of them, Caiaphas, who was high priest that year, said to them, "You know nothing at all." That statement is the truth. But there's something else to see here, too. And I didn't realize that till this morning. I was reading through my lesson, and I thought, there's something else here. Old Testament knowledge, though. You have to have that Old Testament knowledge. What's he talking about? He wrote Caiaphas, who was high priest that year. Caiaphas probably had no business being high priest. Where did high priests come from?
Lineage of Aaron.
Had to be from the lineage of Aaron. And did they serve for just a year?
No, it was life.
Serve for life. Yeah. Exactly right. So Caiaphas says, not only do you know nothing, but then he says this, do you not understand that, nor do you understand that it is better for you that one man should die for the people, not that the whole nation should perish. This is a prophecy. How do I know that?
Because John says so.
Yeah, in the next or a couple sentences down, it's going to tell us the answer. This is a man speaking the words that God put in his mouth. That's what is meant by inspiration. That's what's meant by the phrase God breathed. God put those words in his mouth. A prophet was a mouthpiece for God. Now, we know that he did not say in the next sentence, it said he didn't say this on his own accord, but being high priest that year, he prophesied that Jesus would die for the nation. And not only that, but also to gather into one the children of God who are scattered abroad. Now that's when I had to go back and I had to study the prophecy and study what he's saying here and try to see how that fits.
For Caiaphas, it was a political expedient. The words of God were in his mouth. He didn't intend what God wanted, but he did say it truthfully. But he didn't have really the idea, the truth of that concept. What he was actually saying.
There's another example of that. Can you think of another example of that where a guy said, now this was, in this case, it was, well, of a guy saying something that he didn't really know what he was saying. Peter, if you remember, when he spoke about the being baptized for the remission of your sins, you will receive the gift of the Holy Spirit. This promise is to you and your children who are afar, and to you and your children, and to everyone who is afar off.
You're talking about the afar off.
We don't know who the people was that he was. I don't think Peter knew that who the people was that he was talking that were afar off until we get to Ephesians. And Paul writes to the Gentiles, you who were once a people that were afar off have now been brought near. And so we learn later on that Peter didn't even really know what he was talking about when he said that, but he was speaking by the inspiration of the Holy Spirit. And so those are the words that came out of his mouth, and we learn later on in the scriptures what that means. So that's when I went to this and I said, how do we get from that prophecy? I'm sorry, I don't mean to ignore you, right? Everybody's over here. And how do we get from that prophecy to this answer? And its meaning in all three verses. Well, here,
Can I say something, Ron?
yeah, go ahead.
Yeah, what the writer John is doing here, he's just taking verse 51, 52 and explaining what Caiaphas is meaning. That's what he's doing. It's an explanatory comment on what Caiaphas is actually saying.
Yeah, but I'm trying to figure out where we got not only that, but for the whole, to gather all of the people into one. Maybe the whole nation means the whole Roman Empire. John is thinking, when he's talking nations, maybe he's thinking on a lot larger scale.
Caiaphas is thinking about.
And Caiaphas is just thinking about the Israelites.
Isolating that, which John is meaning all.
Yeah. God's meaning by this, God is meaning all of the people that are scattered abroad are going to be drawn into one person.
It has a double meaning.
Has a double meaning to it, yeah. And a lot of prophecies were like that.
John and Caiaphas being two different things, where John is explaining, Caiaphas is saying this, but he doesn't really know what he's saying. This is what he's saying.
There's an interesting illustration, and I don't have it up here, but it just occurred to me, an interesting illustration that I learned years ago about prophecies. When a prophet spoke them, Moses, you remember, said, this is how you know that if what a prophet says, if these are the words of God, if what the prophet says doesn't happen, then ignore that prophet. So that meant something was supposed to happen within their lifetime of hearing it so that they would know that that prophet was true. When a prophet spoke, it was a little bit like looking at a mountain range. You see this little mountain in the forefront. You see all of it. This mountain that's in the foreground, you see the whole mountain. But there's mountains back there behind it, and you only vaguely see just a little bit of them. So that prophecy that has a double meaning, okay, you can see the meaning of it here right in the forefront. That's what that happened, and so what the prophet said was true. But there was something far, far away that you could only grasp maybe just a tip of it or just a portion of it. And that was kind of the illustration that this teacher gave about prophecies that had dual meanings. You could see them take place right away. But there was something that God intended farther on. So when he said to Joshua, go in and give the people rest, and he promised a day of rest for them, but then he spoke later on through David about a day of rest. He still hadn't completed that prophecy. They saw it completed when they went in and took the land, but there was still that far off prophecy that he was talking about when Jesus would come and the church would be formed, and then Jesus would return, and we would finally have that day of rest when we're in heaven.
The Jews also, the apostles also couldn't really know everything until that which would come later after Jesus' words. And I always like to say that when a teacher teaches something, when children get older, oh, that's what they meant. It's kind of like one of those things.
Yeah. When I was young, my dad didn't know a thing.
Yeah.
And as I got older, I was amazed how much he had learned while I was getting older. That's that same.
We also see, we know that he's referring to Gentiles here. But Peter fought it. Peter fought against preaching to the Gentiles.
Yeah.
God had to really work on him to get him to do what he needed to do. And that was still a resistance for a while within the apostleship.
Yes.
It took them a while to get over that because they had generations of prejudice built into them because of who they were and how they were raised and so on and so forth. You could equate that to other nations and other situations like that throughout history. That, because of mankind being raised a certain way, then they have a hard time understanding. And that's what this is pointing to, but I don't know that they realized what it was pointing to at the time it was said. But it revealed itself over a period of time that God was opening his gospel up to every man, woman, and child on the face of the earth. His whole creation.
You know what I've found in my life? That good, hard, meditative Bible study tears down those preconceived ideas, if you let it. It took me years after becoming a saint, after being baptized, for the remission of my sins, to realize that God wasn't this big, mean man up in the sky just waiting for you to do something wrong so that he could send you to hell. That's what I learned, basically. You make a mistake. When my parents or my mom used to read the book Pinocchio to me, she would say, if you tell a lie, I can see your nose grow. And we were terrified as kids. But you learn that you can, if you keep that as a preconceived idea, you're going to teach it to your kids too, probably. But I don't know where I'm going with that. I just know that studying the Bible finally is starting to tear down. I won't say it's completely torn down all of those preconceived ideas of what I had about the Bible. But it's working. It works on you. And you begin to realize that the more you know, the less you understand. And maybe we ought to leave a lot of this to God's end of the stick to whittle on instead of our own. I don't know. I'm going down a rabbit hole. I'm sorry. Jesus, therefore, no longer walked openly among the Jews, but went from there to a region near the wilderness to a town called Ephraim. And there he stayed with his disciples. You remember David and his mighty men had to hide from Saul. He'd already been anointed king by Samuel, and God had told him that, the kingdom is yours, but he had to wait for a while till God chose the time for him to be king. And so he had to hide out from Saul. So Jesus' hour had not come yet, but it's getting really close. Now, why pick this town? I don't know, but and archaeologists still debate over the uncertainty of this town's location, but it's generally thought that it was located about 20 miles northwest of Jerusalem. 20 miles is a full hard day's walk, probably a little bit more. So Jesus would have been safer from the Jews that were trying to kill him. That's kind of the only reason that I thought of that. There's an archaeologist that's a saint in the Lord's church. He writes this is just a side note for you. He writes a wonderful blog about places and events in that part of the world. And if you're interested in Middle Eastern archaeology and its ties with biblical history, this man you should check out. He has literally thousands of articles and lessons on biblical archaeology. His name is Farrell Jenkins, and this is his blog address, and it doesn't show up because it comes out in blue. It's FERRELLJENKINS.blog. Enough here about that. But it shows from the town that they think is Ephraim, it shows looking east to the wilderness, it's still wilderness. There's nothing out there. It's amazing, the pictures. And they went to this place. This place, Ephraim, is now on the west bank of Jordan, so it's contested territory. He had to drive. His friend took the pictures because they couldn't dilly-dally very long. It's only 20 miles from Jerusalem, but it's dangerous territory to be in. Anyway, now the Passover of the Jews was at hand. This is going to be the last Passover of the Mosaic dispensation. You realize that? They're going to have more after this, but this is the last Passover of the Mosaic dispensation. 1,500 years of tabernacle and temple worship. 1,500 years of being God's chosen people. 1,500 years of sacrificed lambs, bulls, and goats is about to be finalized in the sacrifice of God's Lamb that takes away the sins of the world. and it will be the hub upon which all of human history and destiny turns. So now we'll go into chapter 12 with Dwayne next Sunday, Lord willing. And the creek don't get up over the road. Thank you very much.